Today is Friday, July 11th, 2025, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson. I'm here with my podcast co-host, Mr. Wallace Smith. Mr. Smith, over here in Robinson land, we're just going to talk about me this time.
Sounds great.
We are fully on new grandbaby watch.
Oh, that's right.
We're past the due date.
Oh, wow.
Any day. I wonder if maybe we'll have even started delivering a baby. I know it's not a we, ladies. Before this podcast is even posted, who knows when
That's
that can
right.
happen.
The phone could ring while we're talking, and so I'm not editing that out. I'm keeping that in.
Okay, that sounds good.
That would be pretty epic.
Pivoting to our topic, it was something that I suggested, and I thought with so much going on in the news and with the fact that when Bible prophecies start to warn us about things are beginning to happen for end time events, and you get the four horsemen, the first one is religious deception. So I thought maybe this would be a good time to talk to our listeners about 7 signs of the Antichrist.
7 signs.
Thanks for hanging around through the music, and welcome again to the Living Youth Podcast. And we need to mention that as we are recording this also, speaking of Living Youth things, camp is gearing up for its first Sabbath there, the teen camp in Texas. My wife is there. I got 2 of my sons are there. I had a chance to talk on the phone with her yesterday, but, of course, they're always very busy, and so we did some texting last night. And anyway, it sounds like things are going really well. In fact, she said they're being blessed with very non-Texas-y weather in the sense that it only got up to 91 yesterday. Now, you might be thinking, 91, I would just die.
That would be amazing.
But yeah, July in Texas, 91, that actually sounds fantastic.
Well,
so.
I assume it's the same in cold weather climates as in hot weather climates. Is if you're used to a hot weather climate, and like in Texas, so especially when I lived in Austin, man, June, July, you were hitting 98 every day, and August would start clicking over 100. So a 91-degree day would seem like
a break
in the weather.
That would be great. Think of it being 10 degrees less than what it would normally be. And let's say that if you would like to see photos from camp, it's actually even easier to find them all now than it was a year ago or before. You can go to livingyouth.org. And there actually is a menu item now. If you're going on your phone, you'll have to click on the little hamburger thing, I think. But if you go on a desktop, it's labeled right there at the top, right next to the podcast tab. There's a camp tab. If you click on that, Mr. Ryan Dawson is running media this year, and he's working with, my wife and Mr. Penman, and they are, I haven't actually checked. I know they had them up yesterday or the day before. They're working on getting photos up every single day. And go check it out. Go see what's going on at camp. You'll be seeing, again, fresh batches of photos, hopefully every single day. See them right there at livingyouth.org. Click on the camp tab. And I know they would all appreciate your prayers for a wonderful, wonderful camp experience.
And more 91-degree days.
And more, hey, if it can be 89, that's all right too, So we are talking about the Antichrist today, and I'm so grateful that Mr. Robinson wanted to talk about this topic and brought it up. And we're going to be going over some points that you can actually find also on some old telecasts that we did. It's actually the record high response that we have ever had was this old telecast way back when we had this. We were on actually Discovery Channel back then also, and it was close to 9,000, I think, 9,000 responses. And with a title like 7 Signs of the Antichrist, that tends to do the trick. So we did an updated version a little later. I think he said it was 2023, somewhere around.
Well, no, it aired in January 2024.
Oh, okay. All right. So we're going to be covering those things as well. And Mr. Robinson is right. It's very easy to forget some of the basics or not even realize sometimes we haven't learned some of the basics. And Mr. Robinson's been going over the old booklet, and I really appreciate. I love when Mr. Robinson goes through some things because he texts me here and there, so it's like I'm getting to do it vicariously through him, and he'll stumble on some nuggets, like something Dr. Meredith says or something in a booklet, and he'll text it to me. And anyway, just Mr. Robinson, it makes my day. I love it when you do that.
Well, I suspect we'll promote it as we go even more, but I really would highly recommend, if you haven't in a while, or if you're a younger listener and you've never been through it, the booklet.
Who or what is the Antichrist?
Yes, thank you.
I'll make a note.
Really well done. Dr. Merritt does a great job of laying it out, and not merely like the identity, but like all the what did you say to me the other day? It was so great. All the context that paints of the larger picture, and you can have a good understanding about it. But one of the reasons I thought it would be good to cover this on the podcast is, every so often, you hear the term Antichrist is very loaded. It's not just an internal church.
Oh no, they talk
word.
about it out in the world, and it's even used outside of religious context of the world because it's been a part of Christendom as a bad guy term. That as a result, it's so confused. There's just so much loaded on one term. Oh, you mean like a really evil bad guy? It's like, well, there's actually more specific things.
Well, I thought it would be very helpful to go through it in detail. And since you already had a very good telecast, I watched it this morning. I wanted to see how you fit 7 points into a 25-minute program. It was incredible. You were on point.
Yeah, I'll say that Mr. Robinson saying that is very important because I know he's advised me for my sermons I shouldn't go more than 5 points. He goes, if I go more than 5, I'm not going to make it. So I could see you being very curious, like, okay, I got to see how did Smith do this?
It was really good.
Oh, thank you. Very
anyway,
kind.
I thought we could go through it because the world does not understand who the Antichrist is at all, or the concept of the Antichrist.
Right. Even when they get close, they still miss key things, and so hopefully today we'll be able to clarify. And so we're going to try. We're 6 minutes in or so, but we're going to do our best to kind of hit it pretty quickly. And so you can always re-listen to this if you need to, but then all the better. The booklet discusses all of these things in more detail, and Dr. Meredith gives a lot of context, so you really do understand the larger picture. And then also the telecast. I've added a link to remind myself that when we post this on livingyouth.org, we'll add a link to the booklet, and we'll do our best to add a link to the most recent version of that telecast as well. So, all right. The first point, we haven't even organized how we're going to do this. You want me to read it, or what do you want to read, Mr. Robinson?
I'll tell you what, why don't I read it, and I'll set you up, and then you go into telecast presenter mode. And okay.
That sounds great.
Sign number 1. The final Antichrist will be a powerful religious leader, not a political one, and will lead a false Christianity. There's no question there for you.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think any of these are questions, but that's exactly right. If you look at a lot of especially movies that want to do something with the Antichrist idea, they'll tend to make the Antichrist like some sort of political guy in a suit, that he's. But what they're doing is they're confusing this coming Antichrist. And by the way, some will say, well, doesn't the Bible say there are many Antichrists? And yes, it does. There have been Antichrists throughout history that will come up. So please understand, when we say the Antichrist, we're speaking of the final Antichrist.
Yes.
That is the prophesied one to come, this man of sin, this false prophet that Revelation talks about. But it is a religious leader. It is not the beast of Revelation. If you look in Revelation chapter 17, it describes there a false Christian church and describes it as a harlot. This is really important, and there's more details to come in later points. But, Mr. Robinson gave kind of like, with the Ten Commandments, we have the short version and the longer versions. Like the short version of the fourth commandment is, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. But there's the longer version. And so when you're young and you're memorizing the Ten Commandments, like, it's exercise for mom and dad or something, you can memorize the short version, but then the extra challenge is the longer version. Well, kind of the short version of the first horseman, of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, is that it's religious deception. However, the longer version is that it's not just religious deception. We're not talking about some Buddhism rising to the top, or for that matter, Islam, like some out in the world will claim that the first horseman is Islam, or that the Antichrist is even Islam. It is very specifically a false Christianity.
Yes.
It is not just, it's not political, and it's not some other religion. It is a false version of Christianity.
I actually made that error a few years ago when the message, the woke progressive stuff, was really getting out there, and the previous Pope Francis seemed to be really in support of that and was kind of pushing that. And I thought, oh, maybe the Catholic Church is going to go really woke, and that's going to be the end time system. And I missed the most obvious thing, which is it is a false Christianity.
Yeah, like whatever he does, it's still the false system. Whatever they do with it, right? It's the system itself. So it's important to recognize that that final church, this final false church, is described as a harlot in Revelation 17, because that involves harlotry, and harlotry involves this adulteration. When God accuses Israel of adultery, not just their actual literal adultery as people, but as a culture and as a nation, he wasn't just saying, you become a bunch of Buddhists or this or that. No, they were mixing
Yes.
the actual religion of God with the false religions around them. And it's contrasted in Revelation with the bride of Christ, which is the actual church of God, in Revelation 19, only a couple of chapters later. And so we see this church riding the beast. We don't see it in Revelation 17 being this political beast power. We see it riding that beast. The Apostle John writes in 1 John chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh," we'll get into more details about that later, "is of God. And every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming and is now already in the world." Now, later, elsewhere, the Apostle John talks about there being many antichrists, and yes, there is one to come, he said, but he goes, man, already there's all these antichrists. But the key is, notice what he's
While
talking
they were alive.
Yeah, exactly, while the apostles were alive. And so keep in mind what he's talking about there. He's not talking about some political organization. He's not talking about even the emperor. He's talking about literally false prophets, those that are actually preaching a twisted version of the truth that they were trying to preach. So that's the first thing to look for. You're looking for a religious leader, not some kind of political leader.
I think it's important to realize that this false religious system is depicted as a harlot woman. When you go through the first 9, I think it's the first 9 Proverbs, there's a lot of space put into wisdom personified. Wisdom as a woman calling out, trying to stay on the path, avoid these kind of things, and avoid the adulterous woman.
Right.
And that this represents a deception that will pull you onto a path that leads to death. And so, go figure. God has given us some great images and examples of how to understand these systems, and what better way than to portray it as a prostitute?
Oh yeah, I haven't actually done that in a while. It would be fascinating to go back and read those early chapters of Proverbs where he's warning his son about the false woman, and then think of that spiritually in terms of what that applies about this false Christianity. Because it's not just, it's there, avoid it. No, it is actively trying to suck you into it. And what does it say? It says in Proverbs, steer way away from her house. You don't even walk by it so you can touch the walls. You actually put some distance between you and that. Mr. Robinson, thank you for that. I've never thought about that before.
No.
Looking at it from that perspective.
Go on. So I've off and on studied that part several times, and I've got a bunch of commentaries because they came with my software package, and I'm reading through them. I don't think I ever had a single one of them extrapolate to a larger picture like that about it representing religious deception, and it's never. They almost all take it fairly literally as, you want to make sure that you don't commit adultery, and it's like, well, that's true,
right?
But there's a lot more going on there. So.
Yeah. Oh boy, thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Sign number 2.
And by the way, we should warn everyone, we're going to spend more time on these earlier points, because a lot of the things we'll say in these points, it kind of gives us a little time with the other points, because we can say, remember when we said this? Oh, that relates here. So keep in mind, we hopefully will accelerate as this goes on.
That's a good point, because so for example, possibly lost a little in our elaboration on this is, if you take this out of sign number 1, the Antichrist is not the beast of Revelation.
Right.
That's important. Those are separate things that I think will be explained more later as we go through here.
He leads a false Christianity, and in Revelation 17, it pictures that false Christianity riding the beast, using the beast. So that will come up later.
Okay. Sign 2. He will appear to be Christ-like, good, merciful, pious, but that piety will be a deceptive cover that will fool almost everyone on the earth.
That is really, I'm gonna.
You're like, what great signs!
I'm gonna call out my mother. That sounds terrible, but not really. My mother was never a part of the faith, but she was a sincere person. But I would say she could easily get caught up in what appeared to be religious. I can't wait for her to learn the truth in the second resurrection. And man, for instance, she just really liked the Pope. At the time, I think it was Pope John Paul. Yeah, would have been.
By all accounts, he was quite old by the time I was really aware of the Pope. But by all accounts, quite a nice guy and quite active.
And she just saw, she kind of questioned the Bible here and there. It's like, you can make the Bible say whatever you want. But she goes, but no, she really liked him. She thought, well, that's important to recognize. We're not talking about the Antichrist being some guy that shows up on the scene rubbing his hands like in some evil, stereotypical villain that's right. I can't wait to do evil in the world. No, what you really see is someone who appears very Christ-like. That is a part of the appeal. In fact, we'll give you two references. In Matthew chapter 24, and this is exactly what Mr. Robinson said. At the beginning of Matthew chapter 24, Jesus Christ is talking to his disciples even about things that apply in their day. They had just asked him, because he had said, hey, guess what? The temple is going to be destroyed. Like, I know you're impressed with it all, but it is coming down.
Which would have been mind-boggling at that time.
It would have been. You would not fathom that. And so it was literally going to happen in like 40 years. I mean, within the lifetime of many of them. And, well, some were going to be crucified or martyred before then. But so they say, well, when's this going to happen? And what will be the sign of your coming? So you have in this Olivet prophecy, Christ discussing a lot of things and eventually building to definitely an end time scenario. But he initially starts talking about things even in their day. And we can read in verses 4 through 5. He says, he answered them and said, take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. He says later in Matthew chapter 24, he talks about false Christs, false prophets. So you're looking at those who are actually coming in Christ's own name and how it would begin in their day. And sure enough, that's the evidence that we see in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul talks about, he warns his readers about those who, another Jesus that they could start believing in. Don't believe in another Jesus. Don't believe in a different gospel. Don't accept a different spirit. But very specifically, when we look at the end time scenario, Revelation 13 is kind of my go-to passage for that. I use it a lot. I've often wondered on the telecast, it's like, man, people tired of me citing Revelation 13, but I think it's so crucial.
Yeah, so they need to get over it is what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm never going to say on the telecast, hey, you people get over this. Well, you never know. We do say some things like that on the telecast sometimes maybe. But in Revelation 13, again, kind of highlighting even the first point, that it's a religious leader, not a political one. The first part of Revelation 13 talks about the kind of political, economic, military sort of machinery that is the beast of Revelation. But then you have this second beast. Even my old New King James uninspired subject gets it right. Headline and calls it the second beast. And we start in verse 11. John says here in vision, then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. That is important. In terms of speaking like a dragon, the teachings are the teachings corrupted by the devil, right? And the devil's teachings aren't like, all right, let's go sacrifice a bunch of kids and let's go burn everything. No, you got to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3. And I love the word, the way it's used in the old King James. When we are first introduced to the devil, in the form of the serpent, it says that he was the most subtle of all the creatures, very crafty.
Not a compliment.
It's not meant to be a compliment there. Subtle is an okay word, like arguments can be subtle and subtlety can be good, subtle flavors in a wine. But in that case, not a compliment. That means he sneaks in his deceptions. And so speaks like the dragon in this kind of subtly deceiving way, but notice what it looked like. It had two horns like a lamb. You would think you were looking at a little growing lamb. Well, that's an indication, matching with other scriptures as well, that this coming alternate Christ, if you will, this coming figure, this false prophet, will look like Christ on the surface, good and merciful and pious. But that piety really is going to be a cover for the doctrines that are actually the doctrines of the dragon.
Well, if I may, I would like to read an excerpt from page 6 of, I only have the code down here. Who or what, our internal code for who or what is the Antichrist.
Mr. Robinson knows our codes. He doesn't always know our titles. Is it ATC, right? ATC. That's the code. Yeah, it's who or what is the Antichrist, right?
So to really support the idea that maybe the spirit of or the ideology of the Antichrist is rooted in a counterfeit Christianity, but there's another key component here that just to support what we've been saying from Dr. Meredith.
So this is from the booklet? Okay.
So this is from the booklet. Page 6. Among Satan's deceits, surely none is as great as his system of counterfeit Christianity. And I skip around a little bit on page 6 in case you actually go and read it and notice it's not. I skip around to the points I want to make. Notice that this false religious system is called the mystery of lawlessness. Shortly before Christ's return, it will be headed by a figure called the man of sin or the lawless one. This man who will perform lying wonders can be found elsewhere in scriptures as the great miracle-working false prophet. That's Revelation 13 and 19. The proponent of this lawless system talk about love and about the Lord, but they leave out Christ's powerful instruction to keep the commandments of God. And skipping down again, Satan has employed every stratagem available to get people to believe the doctrine of the Antichrist. And then he goes on to read Matthew 24, 4 and 5, just as you did. But then here's his comment about that. Note that it is the many who will be deceived. And how? They will be deceived because these many false teachers come in Jesus' name. Get that? They use Jesus' own name to deceive people. They come as Christian preachers, air quotes, Christian preachers and teachers, but their message is obviously contrary to the message about Jesus that Jesus himself preached.
That was a banger from Dr.
Yes.
Meredith. Very nice. Good choice, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is very plain. And again, we see that even in the first century. The Apostle Paul warned his readers about this, believing in another Jesus, in a different gospel. And so maybe we can wrap up point 2, but
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
very much, right?
Okay. All right. Sign 3. He will eventually work powerful miracles and wonders that will deceive others into believing God has given him power and approval. By the way, I really like the graphics for point number 2 when it talks about that he'll speak like a lamb and it represents this guy. And then
On the telecast?
fire comes out of his mouth. Or speak like a dragon, sorry. It's really good.
Oh, really? Oh, man, now I got to watch
Go
the
watch
telecast.
the telecast
again. Go watch
just
the telecast.
for the
so
graphics.
he's specifically saying the graphics that, wow, all right, hey, very nice. Kudos to our TV team.
Yes.
I do appreciate how they make us look way better than we deserve. So, all right, this point, yeah, he is going to come with miracles and wonders. Now, that doesn't mean he starts off, like it's obvious that way, but eventually does come to a point where this one will perform miracles and wonders. And it is interesting. I do the one social media I tend to use to check on things, and I'm doing my best to keep it very regulated. But I do, even on that, I know that the algorithms are working on you. But that would be Twitter. Again, I refuse to call it X. In fact, what do I call it? I tend to call it Twitter. I refuse to call it X. That tends to be my label for it.
It's got a ring to it.
I would look at Twitter, and so as a result, Catholic Twitter, it's noticed. The algorithms have noticed I'm interested in some of those things, and some of the debates I see on Twitter between Catholics and Protestants, and it's amazing some of these accounts how much they do point to miraculous things. They point to different artifacts. They make a lot of different claims about. Well, that will feed into this final figure. And the point is not that, well, maybe it's all an illusion, maybe it's holograms, maybe it's look. I'm not going to say there won't be some potentially deceptive technology that's deployed in this vast global enterprise, but the Bible describes it as, it just seems like truly supernatural things, like actual supernatural kinds of miracles being empowered by the satanic world.
Which is not unprecedented. God allowed Pharaoh's priests,
magicians or whatever they were. Yeah.
To mimic what Moses and Aaron were doing at first, but there became a point where God clearly drew a distinction between.
Yeah, there is a demonic spirit world as well, and so there are certain powers. Whenever God has unleashed them to some extent to be allowed them to do certain things, and in Revelation 13, we kind of left off there. If you happen to have your Bible open, some of you listen while you're driving. Please don't have your Bible open while you're driving. But in Revelation chapter 13, continuing that description of the second beast. It says in verse 13 of that chapter 13 that he, speaking of this false prophet, performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. So you see again this dynamic between the religion and the political power, but how he's actually using miraculous, quote unquote, miraculous signs to be able to do this.
It always kind of made sense to me that God would maybe kind of pull back the boundaries a little bit because, this is my own speculation, but like sometimes the experience is everything, and that we would actually get a little taste of this powerful demonic and spirit and the devil himself, that if God weren't protecting him, keeping him in check, we would be in bad shape.
I think one of the lessons, we talk about Job here and there, but one of the lessons from Job is understanding what the devil would do to all of us if he were just completely unchained. And God, he still restrains the devil in Job, right? I mean, he doesn't let him just go willy-nilly, but within the amount of influence he does have, I mean, Satan just unleashes, right? Just so much. Well, when you go back to, I don't want to explain this too big, but if you go back to the Garden of Eden, essentially what Adam and Eve did, to kind of short circuit it really quickly or summarize, they kind of kicked God out. Like, it's like, well, God, we're not going to really obey you. We're kind of going to do what we want, right? And if you look at the curses, among the curse, like for instance, God tells Adam, nature's not going to care about you anymore, right? I mean, this world has to be maintained. If I'm not going to be maintaining it for you, then just like what you're doing now, the entirety of nature is going to be out for itself. And so don't think the trees are going to make fruit just for you. They're going to produce thorns. It's going to do this because it's all about itself. And I think God in his mercy, Paul talks about certain things, the Gentiles having a certain laws, even in their heart, where they're still, have some kind of sense of right and wrong. I think in God's many mercies towards man, just so that we can continue to function. Yeah, there's been restrictions on the demonic world, because what kind of playground would it be if there were absolutely no restrictions? And I think there's a good point. Towards the end time, there's little indications here that, well, no, there's going to be a little bit of unleashing.
I think because, like, I don't know if we're literally the only generation that's felt this way, because mankind has always been following some kind of God or the other. But here in modern times, we've convinced ourselves there's not a God, and so there's no spirit realm, and so there's no
it's
no
not important focus at all.
And,
right.
And I just kind of feel like God's gonna be like, no, actually,
we're gonna wake you up a little bit. That's right. There's definitely going to be it's gonna be hard to imagine the entire world turning to this false religion unless there's kind of an awakening, if you will, to like, oh no, we need to start caring about quote unquote God again. The other verse we'll look at before we move on, and just to parallel that, is in 2 Thessalonians. It's a little more blatant. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, starting in verse 8. Paul says, "And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming." We're clearly talking about the end times here. And he says, "The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders." So yes, we should expect that. So all of you listening, just because you see some wonderful guy on the scene who looks so Christlike and is so giving and is so kind and suddenly is doing these amazing miracles, well, keep in mind, don't just judge for that. That's also a sign of the Antichrist.
Okay, sign number 4. He will teach against the idea that Christ literally lives his life of obedience again within us, helping us to overcome and to obey God's laws and grow in character.
All right. Now, this is subtle, but we hope you'll understand it, because it is definitely a key teaching of God's church. Earlier we talked about Christ coming in the flesh, and there's different nuances about that. One is the teaching that Christ was actually in the flesh, that he literally struggled against sin like we do. And there's so many I don't want to go into all those passages. I had to write them to a reader recently who was kind of bothered by some of our teachings. But the fact is, no, it says he was faced with temptations just like we are. If he doesn't know what it's like to struggle against sin, how does he know what it's like when I'm praying to him and asking for strength in that regard?
And he has it recorded in Hebrews that he learned by going through that process. I think if we oversimplified, and maybe this will help, Protestant teaching about the law, it's that, well, we can't keep the law. And then Christ kept the law for us anyway, because we can't keep the law, and so there's no need for the law anymore, and it's just fundamentally opposed to the
right. And now we don't have to think about it. We don't have to worry about it. Yeah. And that brings us to this other point. And in this one, and especially here in this verse, it really highlights what Mr. Robinson just said. It's in 2 John in verse 7. If you're using computer Bibles, it often makes you type in a 1 for that, for chapter 1. But there's no chapter divisions in John because it's just
It did
one
not.
chapter.
I typed it in and it did not make.
Really? Are
no.
you using accordance on your
Yes.
Mac? I see a smarty. I still use eSword for most of the time, and if I just type, if I got to type in a 1, I got to admit, as an editor guy, it kind of bothers me. But in 2 John and verse 7, again, for the let me read from the New King James, and then I'm going to read from a kind of a weird little translation. I'll explain in a minute. In the New King James, it reads here, and it reads just fine, just so you know. But 2 John verse 7, John says, "For many deceivers have gone out into the world who do not confess Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist." Now, then that definitely, the Antichrist teachings, again, they were talking about something that has continued since the time of the apostles, this Antichrist teachings. But it's easy to miss. It says right there in the translation, 2 John verse 7, who don't confess Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. You might just think, oh yeah, not confessing that he came, right? And way back, 2,000 years ago in the flesh. But then we miss a subtlety of the Greek verb there. And there's a translation that I have that we've used on the telecast for this reason. It's William's New Testament. I'm not recommending everybody go get it because this fellow did not understand the truth, but it's a very well regarded private translation. And private translation just means one person did the translating. It's not like one of those where like a whole committee did it and all these things. And the one thing that I saw I was really praised for, at least in some instances, is an attempt to truly communicate some of the subtleties of the verbs, like Greek verbs. We have present tense, past tense, future tense, all these different tenses. And if you really want to get really particular, there's a lot of subtense. I'm going to make up a word, subtenses to those things. But boy, the Greeks also had a very rich system of how their verb tenses, and his translation is praised by some for its attention to that. And so his translation of 2 John 7 is really interesting. He gets one thing wrong, but another thing very, very right. And so he translates verse 7 in this way. He says, "For many impostors have gone out into the world, men who do not own that Jesus Christ continues to come in human form." A person like this is the impostor and the Antichrist. Now, in this idea of him continuing to come in human form, he interprets this with a footnote, doesn't quite get it. But he's actually pretty close. He says, refers to Christ showing himself to believers in continuing experience. It's not just showing himself, because if he comes in flesh now, like literally today, 2025, as we record this, if he's continuing to come in the flesh, whose flesh is that? That's our flesh. That's across from me, converted, baptized Mr. Robinson's flesh. That's my flesh. What we teach and what we understand from Scripture, like passages like Galatians 2:20, is that Jesus Christ literally now is living his life inside of you. He's living a life of obedience to the laws of God, just like he did 2,000 years ago.
I'm really glad that you made that point because, to younger listeners, and just knowing me, that the New Testament throws around the word flesh and what's another word it uses all the time? Carnal.
Oh, right.
These kind of things. And in this case, it just literally means, we're not spirit beings yet, right? We're living a life, a physical life, and frankly, we're wrapped up in flesh, right?
Right. Lungs, pancreas, we got it all, right?
And the concept that Christ is actually dwelling with us, I mean, you're right, goes off into a whole other topic and everything. But should I read Galatians 2:20 because it really does?
Go for it, Mr. Robinson. The King James Version or New King James? You got that
but
thing.
I can on the fly customize it.
I know you can do it, Robinson.
Galatians 2:20. "I have been crucified with Christ," which has its whole other meaning.
So much there.
we could unpack Galatians 2:20 one time. "It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me, and the life which I live now in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me." And the whole concept in its simplest form is that Christ, spiritually dwelling within us, helps us to keep the commandments. So this Protestant complaint that we can't keep the commandments is a fundamental misunderstanding of Christ coming still to this day in the flesh, because those who have acknowledged that they have sinned, gone through the baptism process, which symbolizes several things, but part of it is symbolizing that we recognize we've done something wrong, also symbolizes a watery grave that we come out of into a new life. And in that new life, Christ comes in and lives with us, and he helps us with. We can keep the commandments with Christ's help.
Yeah, it's exactly right. We'll get into more detail in the next point because it's very intimately related to this. But you do hear, I see it in responses to the telecast. Sometimes people saying, "Oh, you guys keep talking about the law and you can't keep the law," and it's like, yeah, carnal old me, filled with lust and sins and all these other things. Yeah, you bet. However, in His mercy, Christ is now living in me, and He is learning. He is not learning. I'm learning. He's transforming me so that I can keep it, so that I can grow and do those things, and we don't have to fall for those lies. And so this idea is that, well, Christ did it, so you don't even have to worry about it. It's like, well, no, Christ did it, and I want to do it also, right? And thankfully, I have His help. So this idea that Christ continues to come in the flesh, to continues to do what He did, way back when, is vital, and the Antichrist in subtle ways throws shade on that idea, and that's and the system that he represents, this broad system that we now see reflected in, say, Roman Catholicism and Protestantism and such, tends to throw that kind of shade. It's subtle; it's not always obvious. You have to dig. In fact, it ties in a lot to the next point.
All right.
I would say.
Sign number 5. He will be lawless when it comes to God's law, claiming that the commandments, biblical holy days, and laws of God have been changed or done away with and replaced with church commandments, holidays, and canon law.
Exactly. So when we say lawless, because in fact we've even read several verses where we've mentioned the word lawless. In fact, I don't think I'll turn back there for the sake of time, but when we were talking about the signs and wonders in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul was calling him the lawless one, when he was calling him the lawless one, this one that comes. But it doesn't like God, man's laws. It's like, you know what he can't stand is excess regulation, no taxation without representation, or something like that. It's not talking about how you can't drive 55. Well, your listeners today don't even understand the old song, I Can't Drive 55, because you probably haven't seen a 55 mile an hour speed sign. And well, there's some states that still, I think, limit it like that. You feel like you're going a snail's pace. But anyway, that said, I've gotten off track. The lawlessness of this one to come is going to be about the law that God actually cares about, which is God's law. And it doesn't mean just throwing out all law, like, there's some kind of chaotic character that doesn't care about any structure or any order. It actually is the opposite of that. And I think Daniel 7 is one of the best places to go to see that, because we have a prophecy of this one to come in Daniel chapter 7. And, if you read a little Daniel 7, even if you don't understand and how to connect all the details, which I think our booklet on the book of Revelation will help you do that, but you start looking at Daniel 7:24, it talks about 10 horns and 10 kings. It's like, it feels so Revelation-like. Well, of course it does, because the Bible all works together. But in verse 25, it is speaking of this religious leader that's to come, this false Christianity religious leader. And it says in verse 25, he shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time, which should sound like Great Tribulation period there. So it's not just that he's doing away with all law, and it's going to be, it's just a free-for-all, just run around and do everything you want. No, he's going to change times and law, which means he's going to change, like law, instead of being God's law, it'll be his law and his religious system's law. And instead of the times that are important to God, it's going to be his times that he sets. But again, keep in mind, it's not necessarily a wholesale thing. It is always an adulterization. So the holidays that he would put in place or enforce that are already present are going to be those that, you're going to talk about the Bible, and, this is about the Annunciation to Mary, and this is this. It's going to sound, I've seen people, for instance, defending the Mass, so to speak, the Sunday Mass online by highlighting, look, this is biblical and this is biblical. It's like, okay, it is, but that just because you're doing biblical things or things that you can attach to the Bible doesn't mean the event is biblical and what God wants. That's kind of like Satan. That's kind of like saying Satan, when he was tempting Jesus, well, he had a point, he was quoting scripture, and so what he was saying was biblical. Yeah, but how was he using it? Was he using it to justify something that God doesn't want? And same thing here, changing time. So instead of keeping God's holy days and using God's calendar, something completely different. changing law. Like, oh yeah, I know you like God's law, but you know what? Let's take 8 of those commandments and let's just interpret some of them a little differently, and let's change this one to a different day. So lawless, not in the sense that he's pro-chaos, but rather anti-God's law, replacing it with their own.
Well, and changing the Sabbath to Sunday is I think not a bad example either.
Oh, it's
because
a key example.
if you talk to the Catholics, it's like, oh no, we still keep the Lord's Day. It's just moved to Sunday, and that's the same thing, just on a different day. And then fact check. No.
I remember my department head when I was a high school teacher. And she was trying to understand the whole thing about the Sabbath. She goes, "Oh yeah, when I grew up, we kept the Sabbath too. We did." But then, in detail, she was talking about just resting on Sunday. They just didn't do any work or something on Sunday. So yeah, talking about changing times and laws. It's like you got a day of rest, but it's not God's day of rest. It's a different day of rest that shows a completely different allegiance.
Yeah.
And the mark of the beast, that would be a podcast for another time.
And the Sabbath is tied back to the creation.
It is.
Okay. Sign 6. Now this is where it starts to get real for us. This is where it's going to come home. He will persecute true Christians who refuse to compromise with God's commandments and the true teachings of Jesus Christ.
That will definitely be a sign of the Antichrist. And we just read it actually in Daniel chapter 7, where it says the saints are going to be given over into his hand for a certain time. So we saw it in Daniel 7, but let's also look at it in Revelation chapter 12. In Revelation chapter 12, describing those that receive this persecution, let's see, we'll just say in Revelation 12 and, we'll say in Revelation 12. Well, actually, no, we're going to jump to the chase. You have part of the church that is given the opportunity to escape, to be protected from the horrors of the Great Tribulation. Doesn't mean there isn't persecution before that. The Bible does talk about, actually, even Paul says, through much tribulation we enter the kingdom of God. So it doesn't mean that there aren't difficulties before that, but there does come a time, described in terms of, like it says there in Daniel chapter 7, when there's this very particular period when some actually suffer very specifically. But then you look at how they are described. It says in Revelation chapter 17 and verse 12, after part of the church has escaped, it says in verse 17, and the dragon was enraged with the woman, that is the church, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So you see this entity, this person, turning against those who are truly keeping God's commandments. We see it in Revelation actually 13 as well. Revelation 13 and verse 7, just one chapter over. Now it's talking about the first beast, and we'll actually get that. We'll get a bit of that in the last point that we're going to cover. But it's talking here about how the political power is being used. And it says in Revelation 13, verse 7, that it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. We'll see the connection between that and the religious power in the next point. But the fact is, yes, we are going to see a persecution of true Christians, and we're going to see this final false prophet, this final Antichrist, who's at the heart of that. It does tie into a lot of other things in terms of the mark of the beast. Maybe we can put a link. We put a lot of links on this particular post. But the mark of the beast, as you come to find out, is very much tied with Sabbath keeping. In terms, are you going to keep the Sabbath? Are you going to keep this day, this first day of the week that is intimately tied with this Roman pagan system and has been for millennia? Which day are you actually going to keep? And so those who do keep God's laws and such are going to be persecuted. It says in Revelation chapter 13, in verse 16, it says that he, speaking actually of the Antichrist, causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. And please don't get caught up in thinking it's barcode tattoos or something like that. Don't get me wrong, who knows what they're going to use in different ways in this world, but that is not the mark of the beast. When you go back to Deuteronomy, you learn that a sign on your hand, a sign on your forehead is actually a sign of your allegiance to God. Or is God's law there like it's supposed to be? If you go back to Deuteronomy, what's supposed to be on your hand, what's supposed to be in your head, is supposed to be God's law. If you're putting this mark there, you've got to move God's law out of the way to replace it with this mark of the beast. And so with that, what happens if you're not willing to accept the commands and the faith, if you will, of the beast. It says in verse 17 that no one may buy or sell except one who has that mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So, yeah, obeying God's commandments and refusing to compromise is going to distinguish you from society. You're going to be part of the trouble. You're going to be the cause of the trouble, and you're going to begin to be ostracized. You can't participate in the economy, won't be able to keep a job, and eventually are actually going to be persecuted to the extent of physical torture and execution. So, yes, the Antichrist. When you see a great leader doing that, a great religious leader representing a false Christianity, that is definitely a sign that you know that's what we're dealing with is the Antichrist.
You know, I don't want to go on about this, but with the modern technology we have, it's not hard to see a system like this being enforced. You saw it a little bit with COVID with some of the states and how they were really trying to make sure you know your vaccine status was up to date and you can carry a passport around and everything. And my point isn't at all. In fact, I probably shouldn't have mentioned that as the example. but that it's not hard to envision now a system that really could limit what you do. I mean, most of our banking transactions are well known.
You know, Mr. Rod McNair, because we're not saying that these themselves are evil technologies. In fact, that's a lot of the things you see in the world. A lot of things that were developed for great good, come to find out they can be used for great evil as well. And Mr. Rod McNair, going back to I think to 2020, if not, it was 2021. We've linked to it before on the webcast on the website. Has a great article about the potential tech of the beast power, all the different tech that's being developed now. How could it be used in the future?
That's my main point. Then before all this technology, it was hard to envision how you could enforce something like that on that scale, on a worldwide scale.
Now, the one thing I do try to bring up every once in a while to remind myself as well is when it came to 1940s Germany and the Jews, you know, they didn't need AI to keep track of who they were going to persecute. You know, when you got to present papers everywhere, and you know what if one of the stamps on your papers is stamped when you show up for Sunday morning mass, you know, and you get that stamp that you were there, and next thing you know, your paper isn't accumulating any of those stamps.
What a good.
Thanks, Mr. Robinson. I try. All right, last point.
Final sign.
He
will point people to a powerful political, military, economic powerhouse, a resurrected Roman Empire that will use his false Christianity to unify the world. I feel like, you know, as you and I have tried to watch the trends and kind of what the Catholic Church is doing, and then we are indeed seeing more people interested in moving towards the Catholic Church. People feel like this is completely subjective, but it feels like people are ready for something to kind of unify them.
Oh, yeah. I would agree. It has been interesting to see on, like, say, again, Twitter, not X discussions, how people, not everybody, you just see it every once in a while. They don't see it in every single statement, but how they think of the Roman Catholic Church, just for instance, and Western civilization. And they see those things as the same. And then also tie that into Europe as well, how they see an intimate connection with all of these things. And many people see the resurgence of interest in the Roman Catholic Church as interest in Western civilization being done right again, you know, correcting all the errors it has gone into, and Europe being a quote unquote Christian Europe again. And I remember it was it really caught your eye if you were watching prophecy way back when Pope John Paul II, when he talked about Europe and trying to encourage Europe to embrace its roots, and how they wanted to see a united Europe, you know, all the way to the Urals, right? That famous statement that he made, and it was like, well, here is in a subtle kind of way what we see depicted in Revelation 12, where you have one beast, the second beast, pointing people to the first. You know, if only we could be together. You know, if we could do this, if we could come together. And yeah, it's important to recognize what we said at the very beginning. The harlot isn't just walking around the world. She's not saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that." No, well, she's busy drinking the blood of the saints. However, she's using the beast. It says there in Revelation 17, she is riding the beast. The beast is the mechanism by which the harlot will accomplish certain things in the world. And let me just Did you see that in the Middle Ages and earlier with the Roman Catholic using the kings, using the power of various worldly crowns that were yielding authority, even begrudgingly, because it was not a comfortable relationship
Right.
between the papacy and a lot of these kingdoms. But they would have one kingdom declare war against others, and whenever a kingdom bucked the Pope, well, they suffered consequences for that. So you saw this sort of religio-political union, and so one of the signs of this Antichrist to come is that he will be actively pointing people to this political authority and really pressing people to really consider it with a worshipful eye. It is interesting that in laws like with the EU and such, I remember way back paying close attention to this, how laws about speaking too passionately or too inappropriately, if you will, against the government were called blasphemy laws. I always thought that was very fascinating to me. A lot of movements, of course, try to do that. You look at the most recent woke movements, the various woke movements, they've tried to steer government to accomplish their ends. Because if you really want to change the world, you know what you need is the power of government. But eventually that power of government is going to be sought by this final religious power to truly make laws to force people to fit into this mold.
Yeah. Now I didn't think about that, but with some of the woke push, especially when bluntly the previous president got behind him and pushed them, his administration pushed them, there really was an attempt to force compliance to that stuff, and even trying to control the language of how you could say things. And thankfully we've moved on from the madness of the multiple pronouns, but like for a while there, that was a big deal, and companies were doing it, and HR departments. And
oh yeah, I think there's still people out there doing the multiple pronoun stuff, but at least it doesn't have the same force of government behind it in the U.S., which is helpful. There's still landmines here and there in terms of social circumstances, but yeah, at least we don't see as much of that.
Mr. Smith, how would you wrap this up in if you were at camp this year and you were talking to a young man or young woman and they wanted us give me the 30,000-foot overview of who or what is the Antichrist.
Oh wow.
How would you summarize it?
Well, first I would say, before summarizing it, I would say don't let terms like that cause you to fall into one of two ditches. Don't think, I know what all that means. I hear it all the time. No, take the time to actually learn. Take the time to bone up on the basics. But then also don't be intimidated by it. Don't think, they keep saying that and I keep acting like I know what it means, but deep down I don't. We really have some wonderful resources for you to learn. And man, we're recording this here at midday on a Friday. The Sabbath is coming. You actually have a 24-hour period. Of course, you got to sleep, you got to eat, you got to go to church. But you have a whole 24-hour period where maybe you're even wondering, how do I start Bible study? How do I do more in my life? You know what? There is nothing shameful in grabbing a booklet off the shelf and reading it and looking into it. And I highly recommend taking a look at the Antichrist Bible study. The Antichrist booklet, Who or What is the Antichrist? Also checking out the telecast. Again, we'll do our best to put links to those. I'm always afraid I'll forget, but I did write it down. We'll do our best to put links to those at the livingyouth.org website. But if I had to summarize it in a way, the final Antichrist will be the continuation of a series of Antichrists that have existed since the time of the apostles. So it's part of a false Christianity that has existed for a couple of millennia. And he will look like Christ, act like Christ. He will seem very godly on the surface, may even seem to be a really nice guy for those who know the subtle details. But it's the teachings that will be subtly different. They will sound Christian, they will sound biblical, but they will be the subtle deceptions of the devil. He'll eventually perform miracles, but we don't want to wait until he's performing miracles to know what we're doing. Now is the time to invest in knowing the truth. Now is the time to invest in understanding the real and true doctrines of Jesus Christ and his church. So when that time comes, we're not vulnerable to deception. We know what we're about.